Use in Israel just attacked Iran. Here's what happens to your money next. On February 28, 2026, at approximately 2 a.m. Tehran time, the world changed. American warplanes launched from 2 aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. Israeli fighter jets crossed into Iranian airspace. Dozens of missiles struck Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, and when the smoke cleared, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was dead. The first question most people asked was, will this become World War III? That's the wrong question. The right question is, what does this do to your money, your gas prices, your mortgage rate, your savings account, your job? Because what just happened in the Middle East isn't just a military event, it's an economic event, possibly the largest economic shock since 2008, and it's happening right now, this weekend, while markets are closed and you can't do anything about it. But here's what the news won't tell you. The financial consequences of this attack were engineered decades before the first bomb dropped. The moment those missiles launched, a set of economic mechanisms activated that were built into the structure of the global economy. Mechanisms that will transfer wealth from you, the average person, upward to the institutions that profit from crisis. This isn't speculation. The data is already moving. Oil futures jumped 5% before Sunday morning. Gold surged. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that carries 20% of the world's oil supply, was just declared effectively closed by Iranian military command. And the people who designed this financial architecture knew exactly what would happen when a match was lit in the Middle East. Let me show you what's coming for your money, who profits from it, and why none of this is an accident. The 33-mile bottleneck that controls everything. There's a waterway 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. You probably can't find it on a map without looking it up. Most people couldn't point to it. It's called the Strait of Hormuz, and as of March 1, 2026, Iranian military command has told every ship in the region, you are not allowed to pass. Here's why that should terrify you about your finances. Every single day, approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil pass through that strait. That's 20% of everything the entire planet consumes. Saudi Arabian oil, Iraqi oil, Kuwaiti oil, Qatari natural gas. It all has to go through this one 33-kilometer corridor before it reaches the rest of the world. China gets half its oil imports through the strait. Japan, South Korea, India, all critically dependent on that passage. And right now, some of the largest oil tankers and trading houses on the planet have suspended shipments through it. Before a single financial market has opened this week, oil futures on crypto exchanges were already up 5% to nearly $72 per barrel. Analysts at Rystad Energy told Yahoo Finance that without signs of de-escalation, prices could surge $10 to $20 per barrel when markets reopen Sunday night. Lombard Odier says $100 oil is entirely plausible if the strait is blocked for any meaningful duration. One analyst had a simpler summary. A prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a guaranteed global recession. Not a slowdown, not a correction, a recession. Guaranteed. And here's the thing nobody is connecting for you. The recession doesn't happen because of the bombs. It happens because of the bottleneck. Because 150 years of industrial civilization built a global economy that runs on oil, and then threaded 20% of that oil supply through a corridor that Iran shares a coastline with. That wasn't an accident. That's geography weaponized. And on February 28, 2026, Iran pulled the trigger. What happened this weekend, and why it's different this time? Let's get the facts straight, because context matters enormously for what this means to your financial life. This is not the first time the U.S. and Israel have struck Iran. In June 2025, American warplanes bombed 3 Iranian nuclear sites, including the Fordo enrichment facility. Oil prices spiked, then recovered within days. Markets sold off at the open, then recovered. The strait stayed open. Life went on. This time is structurally different in ways the financial press is only beginning to articulate. The June 2025 strikes targeted nuclear infrastructure. The February 2026 operation, codenamed Operation Epic Fury by the Pentagon, Roaring Lion by Israel, targeted something much larger. It targeted the regime itself. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is dead. Trump went on Truth Social Saturday morning and confirmed it. The Iranian government later confirmed the death and declared 40 days of national mourning. This isn't a surgical strike on centrifuges. This is regime change. And Iran's response reflects that distinction. In June 2025, Iran's retaliation was measured. This time, Iran launched an unprecedented wave of missile strikes across the entire Middle East simultaneously, hitting U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. Drones struck Dubai International Airport. An oil tanker was hit near Oman in the Strait of Hormuz. 3 American soldiers are confirmed dead. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps went on maritime radio and told ships, "No passage allowed." The scale of retaliation is categorically different, and that changes the market calculus completely. When markets opened in Asia Sunday night, analysts didn't reference any previous episode as a playbook, because there isn't one. There's no historical precedent for what happens when the supreme leader of Iran is assassinated, and Iran simultaneously attempts to close the world's most important oil choke point. We're in uncharted territory, and your money is already inside it. The price at the pump is just the beginning. Let's start with the most visible and immediate consequence: gas prices. The national average for gasoline in the United States stood at $2.98 per gallon on Saturday, March 1, 2026. That $3 psychological barrier hadn't been crossed yet. By Monday morning, most analysts expect it will be. But the pump price is just the visible tip of an enormous submerged iceberg. Here's the mechanism that most people never see. When oil prices rise, it doesn't just affect your gas tank. It raises the cost of manufacturing everything. Every product on a store shelf was transported there by trucks that run on diesel. Every piece of plastic, every synthetic fiber, every pharmaceutical ingredient. Petroleum is an input. When crude goes from $73 to $90 per barrel, it doesn't just cost you more at the pump. It costs you more at the grocery store, more for clothes, more for medicine, more for everything, everywhere, simultaneously. Economists call this a supply shock, and supply shocks are the most dangerous kind of economic disruption because they're inflationary and recessionary at the same time. They increase prices while decreasing economic activity. The Federal Reserve has no good tool to fight that. If they raise rates to fight inflation, they accelerate the recession. If they cut rates to fight the recession, they accelerate the inflation. They're trapped. We saw this in 1973, when OPEC embargoed oil to the West. We saw it in 1979 during the Iranian Revolution. Both times, inflation spiked, economies contracted, and ordinary workers got crushed on both ends simultaneously. Rising prices destroyed their purchasing power. Rising interest rates destroyed their ability to borrow. The last time the Fed faced this scenario, a man named Paul Volcker raised interest rates to 20%. He crushed inflation. He also triggered the deepest recession since the Great Depression. That's what a prolonged oil supply shock does. Not just expensive gas. Stagflation. Job losses, mortgage rates that make housing unaffordable, savings that get eaten alive by inflation faster than they grow. And this time, the U.S. enters this potential shock with $36 trillion in existing debt, running a $1.8 trillion annual deficit, with interest payments already approaching $1 trillion per year. There's no fiscal cushion. The shock absorbers are already maxed out. The $200 oil scenario, and who engineered it? Here's a number that should stop you cold. If the Strait of Hormuz is closed for more than 30 days, analysts have modeled oil reaching $120 to $150 per barrel within days. If the closure is sustained, prices toward $180 to $200 per barrel, levels not seen in inflation-adjusted terms since the 1979 crisis. That's not a fringe prediction. That's a modeled scenario based on the arithmetic of what 20% of global oil supply disappearing overnight does to the price of the remaining 80%. Let's make it concrete. If oil hits $150 per barrel, gas in America goes above $5 per gallon, probably $6 in California. Airlines start canceling routes because jet fuel becomes economically prohibitive. Shipping costs explode, and every product that was already inflated from tariffs gets inflated again. The Fed faces impossible choices. A disruption of 1 to 3 months pushes recession probability above 70% for Europe and Japan, 50 to 60% for the United States. A 6-month closure would produce a global recession comparable in severity to 2008-2009. But here's what they're not telling you on cable news. While you lose purchasing power, while your mortgage gets harder to afford, while your grocery bill climbs every week, specific entities in the financial system get extraordinarily wealthy. Oil companies, defense contractors, gold holders, the institutions that hold energy stocks, the traders who were positioned correctly before the first bomb dropped. This is the architecture of financial crisis. Wealth doesn't disappear during a shock. It transfers. From the unpositioned to the positioned. From consumers to producers. From debt holders to hard asset holders. From the many to the few. And the few who profit from this weekend's events have been preparing for it for months. The flight to safety, and what it means for every asset class. Right now, before Monday markets open, here's exactly what's happening in the financial system. Money is moving fast. Gold jumped roughly 1.2% in overnight crypto markets to over $5,334 per troy ounce. That's a record. And it's moving higher not because gold suddenly became more useful, but because when geopolitical chaos erupts, institutional money floods into hard assets. Gold is the oldest crisis hedge in human civilization, and the crisis just got very real. The US dollar is strengthening. This sounds paradoxical. America just launched a military operation in the Middle East. Why would the dollar strengthen? Because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, and in a risk-off environment, global capital flows to the reserve currency, regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. This is the paradox of dollar privilege. The worse the crisis, the stronger the dollar relative to everything else, which means the US gets to export its financial instability outward. But here's what dollar strengthening means for you specifically. Emerging market currencies get destroyed. Countries that import oil and have dollar-denominated debt, which is most of the developing world, get hit twice simultaneously. Their import costs skyrocket in local currency terms. Their debt service costs increase. And the International Monetary Fund, playing the same role Paul Volcker designed for it in 1982, moves in with structural adjustment loans that keep the interest payments flowing in exchange for economic sovereignty. The pattern repeats. Every crisis, the same architecture activates, and the same institutions end up holding more assets at the end than at the beginning. Meanwhile, equities are facing a rough Monday open. Analysts at Natixis expect global equities potentially down 1% to 2% or more at the open, with U.S. Treasury yields falling 5 to 10 basis points as money flees into the safety of government bonds. But that safety is illusory for another reason. The U.S. Treasury is spending nearly $1 trillion per year just on interest on existing debt. If this crisis triggers a flight to bonds, yields drop, which seems helpful. But if it triggers inflation fears, yields could spike in the opposite direction, making the government's debt burden even more crushing. The financial system is a web. Pull one thread, an oil supply shock, and the entire structure vibrates. The defense industrial complex just had its best weekend in years. Let's talk about who wins. Because in every war, in every crisis, in every military escalation, someone is getting very, very rich. And it's not the soldiers. It's not the civilians under fire. It's the companies that manufacture the instruments of conflict. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. Their stock prices were already elevated coming into this weekend. The energy sector, as U.S. News reported on Friday, had outperformed strongly in the opening months of 2026 due to heightened geopolitical tensions. Defense contractors have already been seeing record order flows from NATO allies, from Israel, from Gulf states building up their military capacity. This attack just injected rocket fuel into that trend. Every missile fired needs to be replaced. Every air defense interceptor used protecting Israeli cities from Iranian ballistic missiles tonight is a weapon that needs to be manufactured and delivered. The U.S. military burned through enormous weapons stockpiles in Operation Epic Fury. Congress will approve emergency defense supplementals. The contracts will flow to the same handful of defense companies that have been collecting those contracts for 80 years. This is the Rockefeller model applied to war. Vertical integration of violence, regulatory capture of the defense procurement process, permanent government contracts funded by taxpayer debt. The system designed so that those who manufacture conflict profit regardless of outcome. And here's the bitter arithmetic. The U.S. government is already running a $1.8 trillion deficit in peacetime. War spending accelerates that deficit. That deficit is financed by issuing treasury bonds. Those bonds are purchased by, among others, the largest financial institutions, which collect interest, forever, funded by your taxes. Patterson built this system in 1694. Rothschild industrialized it in 1815. Morgan made it infinite in 1913. And Volcker made it inescapable in 1982. The war in the Middle East just activated every single mechanism they built. The bombs dropping on Tehran are, in a very real financial sense, interest compounding. The regime change wildcard, and why markets hate uncertainty more than bad news. Here's something Wall Street genuinely doesn't know how to price. What happens next in Iran? Ali Khamenei is dead. He ruled Iran for 35 years. He was the supreme leader who shaped Iranian foreign policy, nuclear doctrine, regional proxy strategy, everything. And he's gone. Killed by a joint American-Israeli military operation that Trump described as an attempt to obliterate Iran's military and potentially topple its regime. Inside Iran tonight, two things are happening simultaneously. Security forces are firing on citizens who are celebrating Khamenei's death in the streets. Videos are circulating from Karaj, Isfahan, Shiraz. Iranians pouring into the streets in what witnesses describe as joy, shock, and disbelief. Massive anti-government protests had already been rocking Iran since December 2025, the largest since the 1979 revolution. Tonight, those protests have a new, explosive catalyst. But the regime isn't gone yet. Iran's military and Revolutionary Guard are still operational. They're still firing missiles, still threatening the strait. The question of succession, who leads Iran now, is completely unresolved. And unresolved succession in a nuclear-adjacent state that controls the world's most important oil chokepoint is the kind of uncertainty that makes financial markets absolutely freeze. Markets don't just price bad news, they price uncertainty. And the possible outcomes here range from regime change and eventual stabilization to prolonged internal power struggle with ongoing regional conflict, to a desperate regime doubling down and formally mining the Strait of Hormuz. Each scenario has radically different economic consequences. Ben Emmons of FedWatch Advisors put it plainly. Leadership strikes in Tehran raise regime change tail risks and leave an uncertain endgame. Standard Chartered's Eric Robertson noted that investors had already been underpricing geopolitical risk for months. The market was wrong before the bombs dropped. It's being repriced right now. OPEC's emergency response and why it won't be enough. Within hours of the attack, OPEC Plus held emergency consultations. By Sunday, the cartel announced it would raise its production quota by 220,000 barrels per day, above the expected 137,000 barrel adjustment. The move was widely understood as an attempt to signal to markets, We can offset Iranian supply disruption. There's a problem with that story, and it's a big one. Iran produces approximately 3 million barrels per day. Even at its sanctioned output of roughly 1.9 million barrels per day of exports, Iran represents a significant chunk of global supply. OPEC's 220,000 barrel increase offsets less than 10% of what Iran could pull offline. But the bigger problem isn't Iranian oil production, it's the Strait of Hormuz itself. Because Saudi Arabia's oil, the oil OPEC is promising to increase, also goes through the strait. Iraq's oil goes through the strait. Kuwait's oil goes through the strait. The UAE's oil goes through the strait. The only meaningful bypasses are Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, which runs to the Red Sea, and a UAE pipeline that terminates at the Gulf of Oman. Together, they can reroute roughly 6.5 million barrels per day, less than a third of what normally flows through Hormuz. The rest has no alternative route. So OPEC announces more production, but if the strait is closed, the additional production has nowhere to go. It's oil sitting in tanks on the wrong side of a military standoff. The world's spare oil capacity exists in the Gulf, and the Gulf is a war zone this weekend. The Trump administration is reportedly discussing tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The U.S. holds roughly 700 million barrels in the SPR, about 35 days of total U.S. consumption. As a price suppression tool in a global supply disruption, it's a water gun against a wildfire. It can create a brief psychological effect. It cannot replace 20 million barrels per day if the strait stays closed. There is no policy solution to a physical blockade of the world's most important energy choke point. The only solutions are military, force the strait open, or diplomatic, negotiate a ceasefire. And both of those take time, weeks at minimum, possibly months. Your mortgage, your retirement, your savings. Here's the real impact. Let's make this personal, because the abstractions of oil markets and geopolitical risk premiums eventually translate into numbers that show up in your actual financial life. Your gas prices are going up Monday. By how much depends on how quickly markets price in the strait disruption. Analysts say $3.50 to $4 is a likely near-term range without escalation. $5 to $6 if oil hits $120, $7 or more in the $150 scenario. Your grocery prices are going up in the next 30 to 60 days. Energy is an input to everything. Transportation costs for food rise. Fertilizer prices, which are petroleum-derived, rise. Packaging costs rise. The entire food supply chain gets more expensive simultaneously. This is how energy shocks become food inflation. Your mortgage rate's direction depends on what the Federal Reserve does next. If they prioritize inflation, they raise rates or hold them high, making housing less affordable, potentially crashing housing prices if the economy slows. If they prioritize the recession risk, they cut rates. But that could accelerate inflation. Either path has painful consequences for homeowners and prospective buyers. Your retirement account is going to be volatile. The instinct is to panic sell. Historically, that's the wrong move. Markets recover from geopolitical shocks. The June 2025 strike saw equities sell off hard at open, then recover once the strait stayed open. The question is whether this time follows the same pattern. And the honest answer is, nobody knows, because Khamenei has never been assassinated before. Your bonds and fixed income may look safer in the short term as money flees to safety. But if this crisis generates sustained inflation, the real value of those bonds erodes. Fixed income is only safe if inflation stays controlled. A supply shock that sends oil to $100 may make your bonds nominally intact, but worth less in purchasing power. Your gold, if you own any, is having a good weekend. Gold up over 1% overnight with markets closed. The flight to safety trade is in full effect. Hard assets win in supply shock scenarios, at least initially. Your defense and energy stocks, if you own any, are likely to open significantly higher Monday. Energy companies benefit directly from higher crude realization prices. Defense contractors benefit from accelerated government spending. This is the uncomfortable truth of war finance. Somewhere, someone's portfolio is up this weekend. The pattern you were never supposed to see. Here's the part that ties everything together. The attack on Iran didn't create the financial vulnerabilities it's exploiting. It activated them. Those vulnerabilities were engineered over decades, layered into the architecture of the global financial system, exactly the way the architects of modern debt built the system. Deliberately, methodically, and profitably. The United States has $36 trillion in debt. That debt pays $1 trillion per year in interest. Interest funded by taxes, taxes paid by workers. War spending increases the debt. More interest flows to bondholders. The cycle accelerates with every military operation. The global economy runs on oil. Oil is concentrated in one of the most geopolitically unstable regions on Earth. That isn't an accident of geology. Most of the world's recoverable oil was always in the Middle East, but it is a consequence of a century of deliberate decision-making about which energy sources to develop, which to suppress, and how to structure global dependency on petroleum. The financial institutions that hold oil company stocks, defense contractor stocks, government bonds, they structured themselves to profit regardless of whether the missiles work or the diplomacy works. What matters to them is that the system keeps running, the interest keeps flowing, the contracts keep coming, the war premium keeps getting priced into crude. You're not inside a financial crisis looking in, you're inside an architecture looking up, and the architects, as always, are watching from above. What you can actually do right now. I'm not going to pretend there are easy answers, but there are rational responses to what's unfolding. First, understand that panic is the enemy. The people who sold stocks in March 2020 when COVID hit locked in their losses right before one of the biggest recoveries in market history. Volatility is not the same as permanent loss. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary fear. Second, energy and defense are going to outperform in the near term. Integrated oil companies benefit directly from higher crude prices. Defense contractors are going to see accelerated contract flows. This isn't investment advice. It's pattern recognition. The Rockefeller playbook in real time. Third, watch the Strait. The single most important variable in this entire situation is whether the Strait of Hormuz stays closed or opens. Every day it stays closed increases recession probability. Every sign of de-escalation reduces oil prices. The Strait is the pivot point around which every other financial consequence rotates. Fourth, inflation protection is more valuable than it was last week. Hard assets, inflation-linked bonds, commodities exposure. These aren't exciting, but in a supply shock environment, they preserve purchasing power in a way that cash does not. Fifth, understand that this is not unique. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, every overstretched empire eventually faces the moment when its commitments exceed its capacity. The United States has 750 military bases in 80 countries, $36 trillion in debt, and is now in a direct military confrontation with a nation that controls 20% of the global oil supply. This is not an isolated event. It's a data point in a pattern that history has written 3 times before. The final truth. On the morning of February 28, 2026, the world woke up to a different era. The supreme leader of Iran was dead. The Strait of Hormuz was effectively closed. Oil futures were surging. Gold was surging. 3 American soldiers were dead. Iran was firing missiles across the Middle East, and somewhere in the offices of the largest financial institutions on the planet, the ones that hold oil stocks, defense stocks, government bonds, gold reserves, someone was reviewing their positions and doing the math. The math that Patterson built in 1694 when he made government debt permanent. The math that Rothschild industrialized in 1815 when he made sovereign debt inescapable. The math that Morgan formalized in 1913 when he created a central bank that could purchase unlimited government bonds. The math that Volcker weaponized in 1982 when he ensured that even countries that couldn't pay their debts never got to stop paying them. 300 million Americans woke up on March 1, 2026, and started worrying about what would happen to their gas prices and their retirement accounts. A much smaller number of people woke up and checked which way their portfolios were moving. The bombs dropped. The architecture activated. The wealth transfer began. It was designed this way. 4 architects, 3 centuries, 1 system. And everyone on Earth is now inside it, watching the markets open, waiting to find out what their money is worth. If what just happened in Iran finally made you understand that your financial life is not separate from geopolitics, that every military decision, every dollar of debt, every barrel of oil is part of the same interconnected machine, then you're starting to see it clearly. Subscribe, because this is only the beginning of a very long week, and the people who understand the architecture will navigate it. Everyone else will just watch the pump price go up and wonder why. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this is the moment the dollar loses its grip? Or does America find a way out, the way it always has? Drop it in the comments, because the people watching this aren't passive. They see the system. And I want to know what you think happens next. If this changed how you see what's unfolding in the Middle East, if you finally understand that the bombs and the bond markets are the same story, hit like. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells the algorithm that this information deserves to be seen. And subscribe, because this week is going to move fast. Stage 6 doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, and when it does, you'll want to already be here.